It was almost 5:45 in the morning in Memphis, Tennessee on April 19th of 1996. And William Dillon's dogs start losing their minds. They're barking hysterically and they won't stop. This was aggressive and relentless. The kind of barking that pulls you right out of your sleep. William opened up his eyes. He was lying there quietly for a moment. He was trying to make sense of it. They just wouldn't stop. So he got up and he told them to be quiet. But then the motion detector lights around his house turned on, and he thought he could hear voices coming from outside. That was concerning. What is going on? He quickly runs to the window. He looks outside into the darkness, and he sees a man in a red baseball cap bent over in his neighbor's driveway. William steps away just for a minute to throw on some clothes so he can go outside and get a better look. It took maybe a minute or less. But by the time he made it back to the door and looked outside, no one was there. At the same time, his neighbor, Edward Holland, had woken up to William's dog's barking. He too realized it was way more intense than usual. He also thought he heard noises, except these were coming from his driveway. It sounded like somebody talking. He ran to his side door, he cracked it open, he looked outside, and he saw his former daughter-in-law's red Mitsubishi pulled into the driveway just like it always was when she came to pick up her kids. Shannon had dropped them off earlier that evening, and he thought she must be coming back for them now, just like she said she would. But something about what he was seeing out there didn't make sense. Shannon was near her car, but her body was low and tense, and she was bracing herself like she was trying to hold her ground against something. And then he heard her voice, sharp and scared, cutting through the dark, saying, Don't. He too went to go get dressed and ran back outside. And by the time he did, Shannon was gone. The man was gone. The only thing left in that driveway was her car, sitting there with the driver's side door wide open. Was he seeing things? He didn't think so. So where was Shannon? Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. And if you have never been here before, I am Kimbyrleigha. It's nice to finally meet you. Sometimes I get to the point where I need to relax and do something mindless to check out for just a moment, and I play mobile games. But wait, because I have to tell you something that I randomly found when I was watching my friend Hope. She's got a channel here on YouTube called Hope Scope, and I don't know if you caught the video where she unboxed my true crime mystery box, but I recently saw her video trying side hustles, and she mentioned free cash, so I tried it, and I fully went in trying to beat her scores and amounts and thinking, this is probably not going to work. But then there was a game I really liked, and I ended up cashing out real money, and now I realize why I keep hearing about free cash, which is the sponsor for today's video. If you were like me and haven't heard of it, it's a platform where you can earn real money by doing very simple things like playing games, testing out apps, or even answering surveys. And I know how that sounds because I was like, okay, sure, but actually it's super straightforward. You complete tasks, you earn coins, and then convert them into real money, gift cards, or even crypto. My game of choice, Disney Solitaire. I love Beauty and the Beast. It's one of my favorite movies, and the characters show up in the game along with many more as you progress. But if you don't like that, what I actually like is that there's a ton of different options to choose from. So if you don't want to play games, you can do surveys or other tasks. It's kind of one of those things where if you already spend time on your phone, you might as well turn that into something useful, even if it's just extra pocket money or putting it towards something small. As I said, I was skeptical at first, so I looked it up, and they actually have like a 4.8 star rating on Trustpilot with thousands of reviews, which made me feel a lot better about trying it. But the real part that convinced me and made me want to share it with all of you was the cash out. Once you hit $25, you can withdraw, and I'll show you how it works. You just go to your earnings, you scroll to the payout platform you want to use. I chose PayPal. You follow the steps, and that's it. So try it for yourself right now because they're giving my viewers a $10 sign-up bonus if you sign up using my link or the QR code on screen and play your first game to unlock it. I'll put the link right at the top of my description box so it's easy to find. Let me know which game or action item that you pick to earn because I'm kind of curious what everyone ends up doing on there. Thanks again to Free Cash for making this video possible. Now let's get back into the video for today. And I don't know if you caught the intro. This is another video in my Evil Mind series. I did not purposely plan to do them back to back, but I got a little carried away practicing my writing technique for this series, so here we are. Now, most of you have given me really positive feedback and you want to see more of these videos. But if you are used to my deadly deep dives, they have not gone anywhere. Don't worry. I actually have 2 playlists. I will link them below in my description box. They're on my front page as well. The Evil Mind series and all of my deep dives for YouTube Binge. Now, if you're new to Evil Mind specifically, these are the cases that didn't get the Netflix documentary. They're the ones that slipped through the cracks of the news cycle. The ones where the monster was hiding in plain sight. And we dissect them. Not just the what, the why, and the who, but the psychology, the manipulation, the systems that failed, and the people who were let down by all of it. Because some of the scariest people in this world don't live out in the shadows. They could be walking around right next to you in town, sitting at a booth while you're out for dinner. And sometimes, like in this case, they're a predator in a red baseball cap, watching, waiting, while the victim has absolutely no clue that they even exist. The predator in the red baseball cap doesn't even sound horrific enough, and he does have a name, and we're going to get there. But he didn't come out of nowhere. Now, the red baseball cap, that might have been new, but his pattern wasn't. He didn't wake up on the morning of April 18th and snap and become a monster. He had been one for a very long time. He was the one that took Shannon from that driveway. And he was someone that no one had on their radar. No one was watching him. He was just a man in a red baseball cap. And Shannon had no idea that he was targeting her until it was too late. But there was someone that did know. They had been holding on to a secret. The only person he confessed to was the woman who loved him the most, who was sleeping right next to him in bed when he got home that night. But it would take years, a lot of fear, and one FBI agent who refused to give up before that confession was ever spoken out loud. But there were women before Shannon. 1979, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. A 17-year-old girl named Emily Dodson had just graduated from high school. And one night, she's driving home when she realized a car had been following her. She pulls into her own driveway. She gets out, but before she can process what's happening, a man jumps into the driver's seat of her car, pulls out a knife, holds it to her throat, and instructs her to drive, demands her to drive. Emily fights back. She manages to get the knife away from this man, so he pulls out a wrench and hits her across the head with it, knocking her to the ground. And as he swings at her again, she grabs it. She hits him back, and she runs for her front door. She survived, and she identified him. And he pled guilty, but didn't serve any time in jail. Just a slap on the wrist, a mistake. But only 1 year later, in 1980, the same city again. An 18-year-old girl this time named Karen Cannon. She meets a man at a Shoney's restaurant and he seems harmless enough. He's attractive and he just needs a ride home. They talk for a little while and she agrees. But on the way there, he pulls out a knife, breaks her nose with the handle, and then he presses the blade against her side and starts directing her where to go. Karen is brave. She tries to stay alert and she spots a jail coming up. She pulls alongside it, she grabs his hand, and she leans on the horn until a police officer comes out to the car. She survives as well. She identified him too. He pled guilty to aggravated violence again, and he did serve some time, but not enough. He was free again by 1984 to strike for the 3rd time, this time in Jackson, Mississippi. And it's not a teenage girl. It's a 74-year-old woman named Kyle Griffin. She's in her own home when a man breaks in, beats her with an iron skillet, and steals her jewelry, her credit cards, and her pistol. He buries everything in a plastic bag beside a tree in the next county, like he's done this before. Like he already knows how to plan for what's to come, because he had, and he does. But he is caught, and for this one, he was sentenced to time in the Mississippi State Penitentiary. He served 7 years, but then they let him out again. I guess he just hadn't committed a horrific enough crime to do more time. He hadn't gone all the way and killed someone yet. He was out on parole on the night of April 18th of 1996 when he crossed paths with Shannon. She had no idea the plans that he had for her. He was 42 years old. He had a wife. He had 2 kids, and he had a routine. And clearly, I'm not just talking about what he did after he went to work or with his kids or school events or where he liked to hang out. And yes, he had all of that too, but he also had a sinister routine. But before we get into all of that, let's talk about Shannon, who seemingly disappeared into the night from her former father-in-law's driveway. Shannon Marie Baldridge was born on August 28th of 1970 to her mother Stephanie and her father Ronnie. She was one of 2 children. She had a sister named Jennifer, and they grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, a city humming with blues, soul, and Southern warmth. And from the moment she was old enough to understand it, Shannon felt a calling. She carried this deeply without question. She wanted to be a mom. She couldn't wait. And in high school, she met Michael Holland, her first true love, the kind that feels like your entire world when you're that age. And soon after graduation, they got married and they stepped together into adult life. Over the next 8 years, their family grew. First came a son named Michael Jr., then a daughter, Amber, and finally another son they named Chance. The moment that those children arrived, Shannon's world rearranged itself around them completely and totally, without hesitation. Her son, Michael Jr., would later say the best thing about their mother, the very best thing, was how much she loved them. Him, his brother, his sister, just loved them with everything that she had, and they truly loved her back. To Shannon, motherhood wasn't a role, it was her purpose. Every milestone, every scraped knee, every bedtime story was a moment that she treasured. Her friends joked with her. They said her heart was so big, it seemed designed specifically to hold her 3 children and still have space for everyone else. But life is rarely straightforward, and we know it's not perfect. Shannon and Michael, as strong as their love was, they eventually grew apart. Their relationship had run its course, and they slowly drifted until they found themselves standing at a painful crossroad: divorce. And at this point, Shannon was still a young woman with her whole life ahead of her. She was in her early 20s, so it didn't really seem like the end of the world to her. But to Michael, he was struggling deeply. He was completely heartbroken over losing the life that they had built together. Shannon did her best to guide her children gently through all of the turbulence. Even with the heartbreak, she stayed strong for the 3 of them. And moving forward led her into the arms of another man, Robert Sanderson. Now, Robert was a very wealthy and successful businessman. He was actually the founder and chief executive officer of Protection Unlimited Incorporated, a residential and commercial alarm monitoring company based in Memphis, Tennessee. Shannon had been working there as a dispatcher, and the 2 became acquainted. And eventually, what started as a professional relationship became something more. Now, Robert's lifestyle was something so different from anything Shannon had ever known. It was exciting and appealing, and of course, Shannon, she was stunning. If you haven't been watching, maybe you're just listening, now is the time to look, or I can describe her. I think about Tiffany Amber Thiessen from the 90s, or Marissa Tomei, and maybe a mix of both of them, and a little bit of Jennifer Love Hewitt. Today's version of maybe Selena Gomez. The deep, soulful brown eyes, the big, voluminous dark hair, and that sweet, innocent quality, kind of like the girl next door. Shannon was also charismatic, kind, and she was young. I mean, compared to Robert, there was almost a 34-year age gap between them. Robert was almost 58 at the time, and Shannon was barely 25. And I'm not going to pretend that it wasn't a significant detail because it is. And we're going to come back to it and all of the dynamics of this relationship a little later. But everything moved fast and they got married. And then soon afterward, Shannon and her 3 children moved into his upscale home in the Woodland Hills area of Cordova, in the tranquil Cordova Cove. It was a 4-bedroom traditional brick home with a beautiful marble tile front entry, a lot of natural lighting, a fireplace in the living room, and a big backyard. Perfect for a family of 5. What I will say is that people close to Robert said that he was genuinely good with Shannon's kids. He was already a dad. He had kids of his own that he raised, and they were all grown up. But he was still playful and engaged, the kind of stepfather who ran around the house with the children and made them feel happy that he was there. And that mattered to Shannon. Her children's happiness always mattered to her. But Shannon herself was also a full person outside of being a mother and a wife. She had a life that was entirely her own identity that she formed outside of the household, hobbies. And one of them was going to the casino. To her, it was just one of these places she truly allowed herself to just be herself. No routine, no responsibility, no one needing anything from her. She could get dolled up and disappear into the crowded, noisy atmosphere and let loose. Now, I know it might sound like kind of funny because it's a weird way and a weird place to unwind. It's not peaceful at all, but an escape from stress, and the day-to-day routine felt good. And usually, she and Robert would go together. This was their thing. And quickly, Shannon figured out she had a knack for blackjack. And frequently, she would come home with, I'm talking substantial winnings, thousands of dollars in hand. So that was another big reason she liked to gamble, because she loved nice things. Gold jewelry, expensive outfits, luxury purses, and she would certainly treat herself when she had a winning streak. She tried to have a night out to the casino at least 2, maybe 3 times a week if she could. And there were times when Robert was busy. She would go by herself. Everyone knew her there. The high rollers, the staff, the security guards. She never felt unsafe. And she wasn't just lucky. She had a talent. The casino floor was where Shannon got to be sharp and focused and completely in her element in a way that had nothing to do with anyone but herself. I know I referred to it as being dolled up. Well, there's another way to describe it that's probably better. She would dress for it. So I want you to picture this because it's a part of the excitement. Shannon would take her time getting ready on casino nights. She would do her hair, styling it just right. She would do her makeup perfectly. She would choose an outfit that made her feel beautiful. Her nails were done. Her jewelry was on. It was date night casino nights, and she would routinely go on nights that the kids were at her ex-husband Michael's house. He didn't mind taking the kids on short notice either, especially since she would usually head out after dinner when the kids would be going off to bed anyway. Now, for a quick timeline, she'd only been married to Robert for about a year by 1996. And sometimes, especially with last-minute plans or when Michael was working, her former in-laws, his mom and dad, would babysit. She would drive the 20 minutes to Michael's dad, Edward Holland's home in Memphis, Tennessee, drop off her 3 kids, and head out. And sometimes she would pick them up after her and Robert were done gambling. This could be 2 a.m. or it could be 5. This was a normal arrangement, and it was a comfortable one. And that was the plan on the night of April 18th of 1996. But this was a special night because this was Robert's birthday, and the couple planned an evening at Sam's Town Casino in Tunica, Mississippi. This was about an hour away across state lines. They loved it there. It's a nice big resort, and as they call it, it has a gambling hall, probably to sound a little more fancy. There's even a club inside for country western dancing, a pool, a big theater. But of course, Shannon and Robert were interested in the slots and the card games, and there was plenty of them there. 2 whole stories full. So there was Shannon, dropping the kids off and saying goodbye. And before she walked out that door, she hugged each one of her children. She kissed them, and she told them how much she loved them and that she would see them in a few hours. There should have been nothing to worry about. And after she pulled out of that driveway, she headed back home to meet up with Robert before they planned to head out. But when she got to her front door, she realized there were unexpected visitors. Now, this threw an entire wrench in her night. Shannon had already gotten completely ready. She did her hair, her nails, she put her jewelry on, and she was dressed from head to toe in a perfect outfit for a night out, only to be interrupted by Robert's adult daughters, Ashley and Connie, who were actually not too far from Shannon's age. Connie was actually 4 years older than Shannon. So I think you can imagine her, the new wife, the young wife, younger than you, and she's with your father? Definitely tension in this household. But it was their father's birthday. They came over and surprised him with a cake and gifts. They wanted to celebrate with him, and he didn't know how to say no. He thought, casino night? It could wait. And Robert decided they were going to stay home, leaving Shannon hurt and disappointed and angry. It was uncomfortable. Shannon felt that Robert chose them over her, which he did, and rightfully so. They were his children, and Shannon would have probably done the exact same thing, knowing how much she cared about her own children and their feelings. But I understand it. You've gotten yourself ready. You went out of your way to make plans, drop off the kids for the night, and now the evening you were looking forward to is just canceled. Without a conversation, without a heads up, she felt like she had been pushed aside. And she told Robert this. The two of them got into an argument, and at some point, Shannon left. She didn't want to stick around. She was determined not to waste a full face of makeup or an evening of fun. She got into her red Mitsubishi and she drove away. But after she cooled down, she called Robert from the road. Now, she was still emotional and she was still hurt, and she asked, when are you going to be ready to join me? He told her he needed at least 30 minutes. She was pretty much like, don't bother. She was halfway to the casino. And she told him through tears that she felt like he didn't love her. And she hung up. Shannon had no way to know that this would be their last conversation. Robert stayed home with his daughters. Shannon drove to Tunica alone. But I want to be clear about something here because I already told you, but this will come up later in the story. Shannon went to the casino alone all the time. This was not unusual. She knew that world. She was comfortable in it. She was not a woman wandering somewhere unfamiliar and feeling completely vulnerable. This was her space. She knew exactly what she was doing when she left. She arrived at Sam's Town Casino around 7 o'clock in the evening, and she settled in at one of the blackjack tables right away. Now, you're probably going to wonder how we know some of this information. I'm going to tell you something. If you know anything about casinos, they have probably the most cameras out of any other kind of establishment. In 1996, casino surveillance was genuinely sophisticated compared to almost any other industry at the time. Casinos had strong financial incentives. There's money everywhere, and they want to watch everything. When there's money, and I'm talking big money involved, it's worth it. So they invested heavily in camera systems long before most businesses did. But sophisticated for 1996 still looks very primitive by today's standards. There will be footage that I will show you in this case, but the cameras were analog. They were recording on VHS tapes. There was no digital database, no searchable footage, certainly not facial recognition software. A person had to watch every single one of these tapes, every single minute, with their own eyes. And the quality, you could have guessed, mostly grainy and in black and white. Coverage inside the casino floor was fairly comprehensive, though, because that's where the money was moving: the tables, the cashier, the entrances. But outside in the parking lot, it dropped off. And crucially, cameras could be misaligned. And it's not for nothing that I'm giving you all of this information. So just bank it away right now because it will become significant. Maybe being fueled by anger made Shannon more on point than ever, because that night, she quickly found her rhythm. Cards flipped, chips piled higher and higher. She was on a winning streak. The table was buzzing around her, and Shannon was staying completely focused and steady, like she always did. Reading the game, making her moves, and by the time she finally looked up, it was close to 3 o'clock in the morning. Time does fly when you're in the zone like that. And also, they purposely don't put clocks or even windows in these types of establishments because they don't want you to know what time it is, so you will keep gambling. By this time, Shannon knew it was time to cash out. She turned her almost ruined evening into over $5,000. Now, when she went to get her earnings, the casino staff encouraged her to take a check. But she said no, she wanted the cash, $5,100 bills, and she walked out to her car. What Shannon didn't know, and had no reason to know, was that she was being watched in that casino. Not just by the cameras, and not just by turning heads because she was so gorgeous, which was true, but there was someone with very bad intentions watching her every move. From a second-floor balcony overlooking that blackjack table, there was a man in a red baseball cap. He'd been watching her for who knows how long exactly, but at least the better part of about 45 minutes. Watching her win, watching her stack her chips, watching her collect her money and stand up and walk towards the exit. She was safe because the security guard actually escorted Shannon to her car. Casinos will do this when someone leaves with a very significant amount of cash. The guard walked her out, said goodbye, and went back inside. But approximately 40 seconds later, 40 seconds, the man in the red baseball cap came through the same exit and followed her into the parking lot. Nobody stopped him. Nobody even noticed. There was no reason to. He was just a man leaving the casino at 3 a.m. That's not an unusual thing. What was unusual was who he was and what he was capable of and what his plans were. Because when Shannon got into her red Mitsubishi and headed back towards Memphis just to pick up her children, the man got in his maroon Chevrolet Beretta and followed her. This was over an hour drive. She pulled into her former father-in-law's small driveway around approximately 4:30 a.m. And that's where we left off earlier. So it turns out Michael's father wasn't seeing things. Shannon did pull into his driveway that early morning. Now, I think it's important for you to get a visual and an explanation of what this area looks like with the street and where the houses were and how everything was positioned, because the vantage points are going to make a lot more sense to you when you see the layout. I'm a visual person, so it's a must. Michael's parents live in a modest home on Gerald Street in Memphis, Tennessee, 1351 to be exact. It had a paved driveway to the left of the front door. Actually, all the homes on this side of the street had pretty much the same layout. Now remember, I talked about a neighbor named William Dillon. He was the one that heard something because his dogs were barking early that morning, nonstop. And it also woke up Edward. Well, he didn't live directly next door. He lived at 1361 Gerald Street, so just one house was in between them. But these homes were small enough and the distance was short enough that you could see over to your neighbor's driveway. And when Shannon pulled in that night around 4:30, the comforting normality of that entire night was shattered. Now you know why the neighbors' dogs were barking, because they could sense something was very wrong. Shannon was out there, but she wasn't alone. And in the blink of an eye, Shannon was missing. She was taken. And by sunrise on April 19th, the peaceful neighborhood in Memphis, Tennessee had actually transformed into a crime scene. Calls had been made already, of course, to Shannon's husband, Robert, and also to 911. Her former father-in-law, Edward, believed the man that he heard arguing with Shannon was probably Robert, which made sense to him. Who else would be with her? Except when Edward called Robert to ask if Shannon was with him, he said no, and he never came over there. He said he was home all night. He hadn't seen Shannon since she left the night before. Now, when police spoke to Robert, he told them the same thing. And next they wanted to know, what did Shannon look like and what was she wearing? He said she was 5'5", about 130 pounds. He thought she was wearing a black dress, a purse, black loafers with a small heel, several gold rings, long pink fake glue-on nails, and a black jacket with metal buttons on it. There would be more questions to come, but for now, they were examining the evidence in the driveway. They found Shannon's red Mitsubishi still sitting where it was, and the driver's door was wide open, but the engine wasn't running. And on the ground near the car, they found 2 small metal buttons. They looked like they had been torn from a jacket in a struggle. And they found a single pink fake fingernail. Shannon's purse and her keys were nowhere to be found. Well, of course, the men in Shannon's life, her ex-husband, Michael, her current husband, Robert, they're going to be the first persons of interest. She and Robert, they had an argument, and she stormed off. And by all accounts, Shannon's friends and family said the marriage had been rocky almost from the beginning. Robert could be controlling, verbally aggressive, and Shannon had reportedly considered leaving him, and he'd not taken well to that at all. There was actually a it was a post-nuptial agreement signed just 2 weeks before Shannon disappeared. And that required Robert to pay her $10,000 and provide her with an apartment in the event they got divorced. 2 weeks. That timing was not lost on investigators. Robert also had no alibi for the early morning hours when Shannon was taken. Now, he said he'd been home, but he was alone and asleep, and there was no one to confirm that. He had known Shannon's plans for that evening, and as someone who, let me remind you, owns and runs a security company called Protection Unlimited, he had knowledge and resources and connections that the average person simply did not have. Detectives began speaking with neighbors along that street, trying to piece together the fragmented details of what happened in those critical moments. Witnesses consistently described a maroon Chevy Beretta lurking nearby. Several neighbors saw a man wearing a red baseball cap and a blue jean jacket, and they saw him force Shannon into a vehicle before speeding off. Anna Dillon, the wife to the man whose dogs were barking, told police she heard a scream followed by a thud after their motion detector lights came on. She ran to the living room window. She looked out. She saw a second car, possibly a Beretta, parked on the street with the dome light on. She said that someone was behind the steering wheel facing the rear of the car and leaning over the seat, the back part, and pushing something down. She explained that after the person got through pushing downward, they quickly turned around, got into the driver's seat, and drove away at a high rate of speed. Robert was still front and center in law enforcement's minds. They interviewed witnesses at the casino, and an employee named Mark Birchfield claimed he actually saw Robert at Sam's Town the night that Shannon had come in. And not only that, he said she was scared. She was so frightened and she needed help. She was crouched in a corner telling staff that her husband was going to hurt her. But Robert denied that ever happened. Now, he did admit that Shannon got mad, stormed off in the night, but that was after she came back from Gerald Street. He was with his daughters. He denied being anywhere near Gerald Street that night or the casino, and denied ever driving or having a maroon Chevrolet Beretta. He said he loved Shannon, and he was worried sick about her. And then he hired an attorney, and all further communication went through that lawyer. The lack of communication did not help this man. Neither did what Shannon's sister told investigators, that when the family was desperately trying to make flyers right away to find Shannon, they reached out to Robert for just a photograph of his wife, and he refused to help them. In a moment where everyone who loved this woman was doing everything they could, her own husband wouldn't even provide a photo. But despite all of this, the investigators could not place Robert at the scene. And they looked at the possibility that he could have hired someone to take her, but they found nothing. The investigators went through all 512 surveillance cameras at the casino, tape by tape, minute by minute. It was tedious but necessary, and they finally spot Shannon. She's sitting at a blackjack table, and if you're watching, here is the CCTV footage. I know her hair could appear blonde, but it's just the way black and white footage will capture shades. However, after scanning and scanning, they never see Robert anywhere. He wasn't in the footage, not once. And nothing on the camera ever showed an altercation, not with anyone, especially not Robert. So that account that the employee gave, it fell apart. Robert and Shannon frequented that casino, so the employee could have been referring to a different time, a different night, when he might have saw them together and tensions rose, but it wasn't this night. And without physical evidence, suspicion, it wasn't enough. Robert Sanderson remained under a cloud of suspicion, but they did not have enough to move forward. Plus, they didn't know what happened to Shannon yet. Now, the second door that investigators knock on was Michael Hollins, Shannon's ex-husband, the father of her 3 children. He had been paying child support. Shannon had moved on with a wealthy man that she ended up marrying right away, and she had been taken outside of his parents' home. That's a detail that, if you're building a theory, you could work with. So detectives were. And when they checked Michael's time card at the chemical company where he worked, it showed that he was there from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. that night, the time that Shannon was taken. It confirmed exactly what he had told them. He had been at work the entire time. That was the reason he couldn't watch the kids to begin with and why his parents were babysitting. So Michael Holland was eliminated within just a few days. The third door cops showed up at was Brett Muskamp's. And this one had a lot more behind it. Brett had dated Shannon sometime between her divorce from Michael and her marriage to Robert. When things ended between them, he did not handle it well. He would obsessively call her, literally harass her, follow her around, and he one time even blocked her car in so she couldn't leave. He freaked her out so badly, she filed a criminal complaint against him and got a restraining order. Robert had even told investigators that Brett wrote him a letter warning him not to marry Shannon. And that's got to tell you something about how deeply Brett was enraveled with this woman and how hard he was fighting not to let go. So they wonder, did he ever let go? And then there was the timing. That protective order had been lifted just 2 days before Shannon was taken. 2 days. When investigators went to Brett's workplace the day after Shannon disappeared, his boss says he didn't show up. And when they went to his house, he wasn't there either. And for a brief, very urgent moment, it did look like he could be on the run, possibly with Shannon. And then a few days later, Brett walked into the homicide division himself. He told them he'd heard they were looking for him, and he didn't want to just sneak around like something was wrong. He wanted to speak to them directly. He admitted he had been very upset when Shannon ended things, and he admitted he was angry when she married another man, but he denied everything else. His alibi, the same as Robert's. He was home. He was asleep. But at least his was confirmed by his mother, which is still not exactly an ironclad alibi. But investigators also verified that Brett did not own or drive a maroon Beretta. When he took a polygraph, he passed. So that door closed too for the time being. 3 suspects, 3 dead ends. And the investigation was running out of obvious places to look. But here's the thing. The right answer had already come in. They just didn't know it yet. Someone close to the person who took Shannon had tried. Once she saw Shannon's photo on the news, her heart sank. Knowing that Shannon was a mother of 3 and that she had loved ones that would miss her, she took action. She tried to warn them. She called. She put in a tip less than 24 hours after Shannon disappeared. Yet no one took it seriously. And speaking of Shannon's children, when they woke up at their grandparents' house, their father had the difficult task of explaining why mommy had not come to pick them up yet. Michael didn't have the heart to tell them their mother had been kidnapped. Would they have even understood? Little Amber was only 5. She recalled just lying there in bed wondering, where's mommy? And then she sees her mother's face on the news. Amber was so confused. She's like, Daddy, look, there's mommy. Why is mommy on TV? Imagine how hard that would have been. It's heartbreaking just to think about it. The people who loved Shannon wanted answers. And yet there was one glaring right at investigators. But like I told you, they hadn't taken it seriously. But I'm going to let you in on what this call was all about. It was actually on the very day that Shannon was reported missing, April 19th. The caller was a woman named Sharon Powers. That night, she saw a news segment, and later she decided to call the Crime Stoppers hotline. Here are the details she provided. Sharon said she thought her husband, Gerald, might have been involved. The operator asked her why she thought that, and Sharon told them he had been out all night the night before, specifically at the Sam's Town Casino. She sounded pretty angry about that, and added that she saw him leave wearing a red baseball cap and a blue jean jacket, just like the news reported. The neighbors had told police the kidnapper was wearing. Anything else, they asked, and Sharon said, yeah. He was driving my maroon Chevy Beretta. Now, you would think that would check off all the boxes. Every single detail matched what the witnesses on Gerald Street had saw and they described. But it's the way that Sharon came across. When asked more in-depth questions about her husband, she was vague. She agreed to allow officers to meet with her at her home and take a formal statement. But when they got there, she clammed up. Her details became inconsistent. She couldn't give them much beyond that initial tip. And investigators, looking at the full picture, a wife whose husband had been out all night, possibly gambling or with another woman, they chalked it up to a domestic dispute. Now, I don't know how much of you know anything about the Ted Bundy case, but his longtime girlfriend did the same thing. She called in a tip. She said, I'm worried that my boyfriend may be involved in those murders. He drives a VW Bug. He's got brown hair. His name is Ted. In that case, it got the ball moving right away. But here, all they did was take down a note with the name Gerald Lee Powers, except they put that at the bottom of the list, and they kept working on other leads that they had prioritized. That is so frustrating. But you're getting to see behind the yellow tape. Investigators did not have that privilege. They did not dig deeper at that point because Sharon was purposely holding back. There were valid reasons for that. It was one of the most consequential decisions of this entire investigation, and it would take weeks before anyone truly understood what Sharon Powers actually knew. 20 days go by. 20 days of Shannon's family waiting by the phone, putting up flyers, driving all around Memphis looking for any sign of her. 20 days of her 3 children asking questions that nobody knew how to answer. 20 days of an investigation that had knocked on every door it could to find answers but kept hitting walls. I know the older children had seen more images of their mom on TV, and Michael Jr., who was old enough to read, saw the word missing next to his mother's photo. He said his world fell apart. He cried all night because the reality had set in. And then on May 9th of 1996, a man named Marshall Mullins and his sister drove out to a piece of rural property in Eudora. It was property that their father had left to them. This location was about 40 miles outside of Memphis, 20 acres, an abandoned house, a small storage shed attached to the back. They were there to check the condition of the place, to see what they had inherited. And to their absolute horror, it was way more than they bargained for. As Marshall is walking around the outside of the house, he starts to notice an odor. It was the kind that stops you mid-step, and he assumes it's a dead animal. It's the kind of thing you would find on a rural property that's been sitting empty. But then his sister finds a brand new looking black loafer on the ground near the side of the house. And then Marshall saw the other shoe on the backside. He peers inside that small storage room, and that's when he saw a female leg from the mid-thigh down, sticking out from the dirt-covered floor. He ran so fast out of there to find a phone, and he called the police. This was around 4:30 in the afternoon when that call came in. When officers arrived, they found the body of a woman inside that shed face down, fully clothed, but the condition of the remains, which had been exposed to the heat, the elements, the insects, for as long as it had been, made an immediate identification impossible. There was another woman that was missing from Tate County at the time, so the investigators could not assume it was Shannon, even knowing that Shannon was still out there somewhere. They had to be certain. Jeffrey Pounders, the county coroner, actually went down to the location to look at the body, and he made a note. that it was very decomposed, but he saw no jewelry like was described by Robert, only clothing. Pictures were taken, and they were later sent to Robert, and he confirmed the outfit on that body matched what his wife was wearing the night she left for the casino. Now, Dr. Pounder sent the body to be autopsied at the University Hospital in Jackson. The examination was conducted by Dr. Steve Hain in conjunction with Dr. Harry Mincer. He was an expert in the area of forensic odontology. He works with teeth, and he took the impressions of these teeth from the remains, and he was able to determine that they matched dental x-rays taken of Shannon Sanderson back in 1994. They had indeed located Shannon Marie Sanderson's remains. And the autopsy, it was actually very difficult to hear because this doctor, this forensic anthropologist, he examined Shannon's skull and he found two distinctive types of trauma. Blunt force injury came first because someone had delivered at least one major blow to Shannon's face, and they did it with enough force to fracture both sides of her jaw, crack the bones around her eye sockets, fracture the roof of her mouth, and knock out her upper right front tooth. The bone in front of it had been broken away entirely, and a second tooth had been chipped. This was sustained deliberate violence. And then after all of that, a single .25 caliber bullet to the right side of her head behind her ear. This doesn't have to be said because I'm sure you know the manner of death was ruled a homicide and the cause a single gunshot wound. Now back at the scene, it was noted that one of Shannon's shoes had been found pretty far away from the shed, and investigators found drag marks leading back towards that structure where she was located. This showed them that she was dragged all that way and that she had fought. She had tried to run and she had fought for her life. And it still wasn't enough. Her jewelry was gone. The $5,000 she won at the blackjack table was gone. Her purse was gone. And right away, that seemed to be the motive. And that was because it didn't appear that she had been violated, and it would have been really hard to tell since her remains were so badly decomposed. But all of her clothing was still on when she was found. Of course, this was shocking news for her family. Shannon's sister later said she had no idea how she found out that her sister was dead, but she could not believe it. And in her words, it killed their mother. When she was told about what happened to Shannon, she broke down and she was never the same. And then 4 years later, she died of a broken heart. That's what Jennifer said. Shannon's ex-husband had now this impossible job of telling their children what happened to their mother. There's no script for that conversation. There's nowhere you can look to know how to say this to someone. No right words. Michael Jr. was 7, Amber was 5, and Chance was only 3. And Michael did the only thing he could. He told his children their mother had been a good person, that she loved them deeply, and that she always would, but she was never coming back. And that is so unfair to these precious little babies. Now, 7-year-old Michael Jr. would later say that he kept thinking, how could someone do this to his mom? She had her whole life ahead of her. The idea that someone could hurt her like that, it left him with the kind of anger and confusion that he never had felt before, and he wouldn't fully know how to deal with it for a very long time. And somewhere in Clarksdale, Mississippi, the man in the red baseball cap was watching the same news reports, pacing, looking out through his windows, closing his blinds, trying to figure out how far ahead he was and how much time he had left to plan his escape. Now, I need to let you in on the other side of the story from Gerald's wife, Sharon's point of view. He left the night before, and he didn't come home until 9:30 in the morning. And Sharon noticed immediately that something was off. Now, on the surface, the timing wasn't that unusual. He would come home from the casino all hours of the morning and night. But everything about the way he was moving that night was wrong. He was wired. He was restless. He was pacing the house. He was opening and closing the blinds. He was pulling them back slightly, peering out to the street, and then moving to another window and doing the same thing, like he was expecting something or someone to pull up outside at any moment. And then he went outside and he washed their car obsessively. Now, that was not normal. And there was also the cut. He had a cut on his forearm. And she asked, what happened? And instead of answering, he defaulted to positive news that he had been on quite a winning streak at the casino. He was flashing the cash. He said he even called a neighbor to pass along a message to the family that he was going to be late because of how well he was doing at the tables. In a gesture that was so out of character for him that it immediately struck Sharon as very strange, he pulls one of the $100 bills out of the stack and he gives it to her. He says, "Go buy yourself something nice." Gerald had never done anything like that before, not once in their marriage. Was it to silence her? Then he went to take a shower, and that's when Sharon's suspicion shifted in a much different direction because Gerald never showered when he came home from gambling. He went straight to bed because he was tired. He always went straight to bed. The shower felt like something was being washed off. Evidence. And she was brave because she didn't let it go. She confronted him. But not because she thought he killed anyone. No, she thought he was cheating. She thought he had been with another woman. And to be fair, that is the most logical explanation in that moment that she could have had. He'd been out all night. He's acting strange. Now he's scrubbing himself clean before he even sat down. Gerald's reaction was immediate and it was violent. He didn't want to be questioned. He grabbed her and he threw her against the wall. And he denied it. He insisted he was not with anyone. And she needed to stop questioning him. And then as he got into bed for the nap, he actually turned to her. And he admitted what he had been doing. Yeah, he wasn't on a winning streak. But he felt like he hit the jackpot when he spotted Shannon. And before I tell you what Gerald told his wife, you have to understand who this man is. Gerald Lee Powers was 42 years old in April of 1996. He worked in construction, he gambled, he had been married 5 times. But on the surface, if you pass this man on the street, if you saw him at a gas station, or if he even sat down next to you at a blackjack table, there was nothing about him that would make you move away. He was just a man, ordinary looking, unremarkable. But Gerald Lee Powers had been hurting people for a very long time. And the people he hurt were almost always women. I walked you through part of his history. Emily, Karen, Clio. 3 women across 2 states, spanning 5 years before he finally saw the inside of a prison. What I want to talk about now is what came afterward. Because a man who does those kind of things doesn't just come out of prison reformed. He comes out practiced. And there Shannon was, in a driveway on Gerald Street, the same name as the man who took her. It's horrifically ironic. Gerald was released on parole in 1991, and in July of 1992, less than a year after walking out of those gates, he married a woman named Sharon, his 5th wife. And what Sharon experienced inside that marriage tells you everything you need to know about who Gerald Powers actually was when no one on the outside was watching. But before we get there, here's something that isn't in most of the retellings of this story, and I had to find it by going back through original court documents. Gerald Powers was not born in the United States. He was born in Taiwan, and he came to this country when he was only 10 years old. His first wife was Pamela, who he started dating back in high school, and they got married in 1973 when she was 17 and he was only 18. She knew and would later reveal that his relationship with his own mother was deeply difficult. His mom, Taiwanese, significant language barriers between them, and Gerald never developed what Pamela described as a normal mother-son relationship with her. Pamela said his mother-in-law, her own mother, actually stepped into that role for him. She became the maternal figure in Gerald's life that he never really had. And there is actually something I learned recently that I want to share. A really profound phenomenon that researchers and soldiers and hospital workers have all observed independently in people's final moments. When they are in extreme pain or fear or facing death, they call for their mother. Soldiers on battlefields, the elderly in their last hours, people in moments of absolute crisis. It doesn't matter how old they are or how long it's been, their mother is the first attachment figure, the original source of comfort and safety and unconditional love. And something in us reaches for that when everything else falls away, even if their mother died years ago. Gerald never had that. Whatever that foundational, primal security is supposed to feel like, he never got it. His mother was unreachable. She was there, but she was also gone. And I'm not telling you this to generate sympathy. I'm telling you this because context always matters. Understanding how someone becomes what Gerald becomes requires us to look at the full picture, the displacement, the disconnection, the absence of something foundational, without using any of it as an excuse for what he chose to do to women his entire adult life. Because whatever Gerald's story was, he made those choices over and over and over again. He chose Emily, he chose Karen, he chose Clio, and then he chose Shannon. But I want to go back to his wife, Sharon. As I said, wife number 5, I wonder why. Because he could only wear a mask so long before it started to slip. Sharon described living with Gerald as existing inside something permanently in chaos. He was what she called an unpredictable, self-centered taskmaster, a man whose moods would shift without warning and without a reason. He would hit her, he would throw her to the ground, he would kick her. He threatened to kill her 4 or 5 times over the course of their marriage. He once smashed one of her antique plates because he wanted Chinese food and she had gotten Mexican food instead. She had 3 children from a previous marriage and they were all terrified of him. He had once forced Sharon's teenage son to cut the grass using nothing but a pair of household scissors. Not because it needed to be done that way, of course not, but because making someone do something humiliating was a reward for Gerald. And he had a bell, a handheld bell, a little bell he would hold, and he would ring it anytime he needed something. Imagine him sitting on the couch, watching TV, Sharon taking care of the kids, walking on eggshells, and doing all the household chores to his liking. And she's interrupted by the sound of a ringing bell. She needed to stop whatever she was doing and come running, or else. You might ask why, how, who could live like that? Well, it's all Sharon knew. And believe it or not, she was in love with Gerald. It became part of her routine, the toxic routine. Pain and trauma, they also get imprinted on our brains like happiness. And those intense feelings, whether they're good or they're bad, they have an addictive quality to them. His routine outside of the home revolved around casinos. The car he drove was actually Sharon's, a maroon 1989 Chevrolet Beretta, registered in her name. He would disappear for 2 or 3 days, taking her car, gambling, doing whatever he did, but he would eventually come back. Sharon had to learn to live around his absences the same way she had learned to live around everything else about him, carefully and quietly, always aware of where he was in the room because she never knew what he was going to do next. Now, he had told her that he made his living from gambling, and he sometimes did come home with some money, but Gerald's relationship with money was the same as his relationship with everything else. It was about taking and taking, not earning. I mentioned that Gerald had children of his own. He had 2 of them from his marriage to Pamela, the first woman who really fell in love with him, back when she was drawn to his shy, quiet, polite nature when they were high schoolers. But whatever that version of Gerald once had been, it was completely unrecognizable by April of 1996. Because what Gerald did that night that he targeted Shannon wasn't impulsive. He was on parole. He had 5 prior convictions. You already know that Shannon was not his first victim, but she was the one he took the furthest. Most cases involve someone the victim knows, a husband, a boyfriend, a family member, someone who was already inside their life, already trusted, already given access. And there's a particular kind of horror in the betrayal of all that, the intimacy of it and the way that it poisons every memory of that person. But this case is different. And in some ways, I actually find it more unsettling because Gerald Powers had never met Shannon in his entire life. He didn't even know her name. He didn't know that she had 3 children. He didn't know anything about her except she was winning money and she was going to leave the casino alone. So he selected her. And that word selected is really important. He made a calculated decision. Predatory stranger violence, that's what it's called. It operates on a logic that's deeply uncomfortable when you look at it because it forces us to ask what made someone a target. And that question, it can very quickly become victim blaming if you're not careful. So I want to be really precise. Shannon did not do anything wrong. She went to a casino. She won money and she left. Those aren't mistakes. Those are just things a person did on a random night of the week that many others were doing too, even other women. But Gerald was looking for a specific combination of factors criminals always do. Someone visibly winning a significant amount of cash, someone who appeared to be alone, someone without an obvious person waiting for them, watching for them, expecting them at a specific time. And Shannon fit that picture on that night because Robert had stayed home, because no one was meeting her, because the argument had sent her across state lines by herself. But it's still not even Robert's fault. Predators like Gerald don't target people because anything that they did. They target people because of what they see as an opportunity. It is entirely about the predator's calculation, not the victim's behavior. Shannon could have been anyone. The tragedy is that on that night, he happened to be there and she happened to be the one that he was watching. What the research on this kind of predatory behavior consistently will show is that these are not impulsive men. They're patient. They're observant. They are so good at identifying moments of vulnerability. And that's because they've usually been practicing that skill for a very long time. Emily survived. Karen survived. Clio survived. But Shannon didn't. And it wasn't because Shannon did something differently, but it was because Gerald had spent decades refining exactly what he was doing. And he had learned somewhere along the way, survivors identify him. And this time, he wasn't going to let that happen. But now back to Sharon, confronting Gerald about not coming home the night before. I told you he confessed in full. He told her that while he was at the casino, he was watching a woman. She was winning a lot of money in cash. She was alone. And he followed her when she left. And then he trailed her all the way back to her house to a driveway on a residential street in Memphis, Tennessee. And he had taken her from her car, forced her into his back seat, and driven her across state lines into Mississippi. Then he forced her to remain quiet. And when they got more isolated, they stopped. And he forced her to move from the back seat into the trunk. And then he took her to an abandoned shed. And that is where he beat her and robbed her, shot her, and left her body. Sharon was shocked. He really did tell her the truth, even though she didn't know it yet. It was still just a story, one that she probably didn't want to believe. When Sharon asked how he kept this woman under control in the car, Gerald said he put the fear of God into her. Clearly, he was holding her at gunpoint. When Sharon asked, why? Why would you do something like that? What he said blows my mind. He told her he did it for their family. That's sick. Almost as though he was justifying it. As if it didn't hurt someone else's family. Someone else's loved ones, Shannon's. As if she wouldn't be missed. But they needed the money. Before we go any further, I just want to pause for a moment because I think a lot of you listening to this are going to be asking the same question that I asked myself when I heard it. Why? Not just why did he do it, I'm talking about why did he tell her? Why would a man who just committed a murder tell his wife exactly what he had done? It's almost really stupid. You know, you hear of stupid criminals. You're glad they're stupid because they usually get caught, and that's a good thing. But it happens over and over again. Just like this, killers confess to their partners specifically. And guess what? There is actually a psychology behind why. The first reason is control. For men like Gerald, men whose entire identity is built around dominance and power, a secret this big is also a burden this big. Carrying it alone is a lot, but sharing it with a partner, one that they already control, means transferring some of that weight to somebody else and then pulling that person into the circle. Because now that Sharon knows, Sharon is implicated, which means Sharon has something to lose if she talks. Confessing wasn't a moment of vulnerability, if that's what you were thinking. It was a power move. And now I'm sure it makes more sense. The second reason is something that researchers call the need for a witness. And I hope you learned something in these evil minds cases. There is evidence that certain types of violent offenders, particularly those with narcissistic traits, experience their crimes as these big, significant events that demand acknowledgement. They need someone to know what they did. Not because they feel guilty, because they feel powerful. And power without an audience is like a tree falling in an empty forest, right? If there's no one there to hear it or see it, did it really happen? It's like they say, if you didn't post it, did it really happen? Same for this instance. And the third reason is even more straightforward than those other two. Cheryl came home jittery. He was pacing. He was washing the car. He was giving Sharon money out of nowhere, and then she confronted him. She accused him of cheating, though. And whatever else Gerald was, he apparently thought the accusation of him being a cheater was worse than accusing him of murder, if you can even believe that. So he wanted to correct her. She wasn't right. She was wrong. And that felt good. He wanted to make sure she knew that's not what I did, as if it were somehow better for her to know the truth. This wasn't a calculation in the moment. It was just ego on display. But it did cost him everything. And there was Sharon, just sitting there trying to process what she was hearing, the man she married, the man she shared a home with, the man she was afraid of on any ordinary night of the week, had now just told her he kidnapped and murdered a woman the night before. And he did it for money. He framed it as something he did for her, for them. She continued listening and he continued to speak. He told her afterward he went behind a different casino in northern Mississippi called Splash and threw the gun and Shannon's purse into the river. And then he told her that he hid the woman's jewelry, 5 gold and diamond rings, behind a lounge in Clarksdale, tucked inside an old couch wrapped in pink plastic and foil in case Sharon ever needed money. And then he pulled out the cash, a big stack of it wrapped in tinfoil and plastic. He took it outside and he buried it in their backyard. Sharon went hysterical, but not the way you might think. How does that meme go? That's my man. I'ma sit beside him. Yeah, she told him, take her clothes and throw them in different dumpsters so that it'll be harder for them to be located and connected to him. And he went and did it. On one hand, maybe that was smart of her. Maybe she was just going along with it because she was scared. Or maybe it was because she was in love with him, even after he confessed. If you chose the latter, in love with him, you would be right, because her own confession later on, she said, I love this man. And I know what some of you are thinking right now, because I thought it too. How? How do you hear what Shannon heard sitting in your house, listening to your husband describe in a calm, matter-of-fact way that he had followed a woman, taken her from her children, beaten her, shot her, and then you still say you're in love with him? How does that coexist? And the answer is something you've probably heard many times before, trauma bonding. It is one of the most important concepts if you're trying to understand any relationship that's defined by prolonged mistreatment, not just in this case. And I see questions like this all the time, usually in context of like, why does a woman stay when they're treating them so badly, right? Well, it goes back to what I was talking about when I said feelings can be addictive. Trauma bonding is what happens when cycles of mistreatment and kindness are like back to back. It's between cruelty and care. And this can create this powerful psychological attachment between a victim and the person that's hurting them. This was first described by a researcher named Patrick Carnes. He used the term to explain why people in a toxic relationship often feel deeply attached to their partner, even more than they do to a person who's never hurt them. It sounds backwards, right? But learning all of this is going to help you understand true crime cases so much better. The reason it works this way is it does something to the brain chemistry. When someone hurts you and is then kind to you, your brain releases dopamine during the kind moments in a way that it simply doesn't during stable, consistent, safe relationships. I know that sounds crazy, but it's a boost because you're going from a low to a high. So you know that saying, you can't appreciate the light if you haven't seen darkness, or you can't appreciate the good days if you haven't experienced bad ones? It's similar. The relief of those painful moments stopping, it actually feels the same as love. It's almost like the victim waits for it. Their nervous system has been conditioned to associate this specific person with both their source of pain, but also their source of comfort simultaneously. And that creates a bond that is so genuinely difficult to break. Not because a person's weak. I want you to understand that. They are not foolish. It is because their brain has been chemically rewired by this entire experience. Sharon had been living inside that cycle with Gerald for years. So to her, it truly felt like love that she was feeling. So when Sharon heard what Gerald had done and still felt love for him, that's not a failure of her character. That is not stupidity. That's the nervous system doing exactly what years of trauma had trained her to do. And the really remarkable thing is not that Sharon loved him anyway. The remarkable thing is that despite all of that, the fear, the love, everything her brain was telling her, she called in a tip. But that comes later. That same evening, the same day that Gerald had confessed to murdering this woman, he told Sharon, get in the car. We're going to go back to Sam's Town Casino to gamble because now he had even more money, more chances to win. But Sharon talked him out of it, but not fully. Just not going back to that casino. They went to Harrah's instead, the four of them, Gerald, Sharon, and her two sons. As they were leaving, a security car pulled slowly past the Beretta in the parking lot, and Gerald was freaked out. He told them to get in the car now, and they quickly left. He could tell the walls were closing in. It was that night that Sharon saw the news report. And there was Shannon Sanderson's face right on the screen. The story of her abduction, who she was, her family in tears begging for her safe return, and her 3 precious children. And that fear that had already been sitting in Sharon's chest since that morning locked itself inside completely. And as if Gerald could sense it, he said he was leaving, and she didn't stop him. She watched him pack clothes while he reminded her there was money buried in the backyard if she needed it. He told her if anyone asked, he was going to his mother's. And then he walked out. The moment he was gone, Sharon raced to her friend Margaret York's house. And she immediately told Margaret everything, which is a smart move because if anything were to happen to Sharon, somebody else could be a witness. Margaret lived near the couple. She knew them both, and she listened to this whole thing, and she told Sharon, you need to call the police. And that was when she made the initial call. She called in the tip saying, I think my husband might have been involved in the abduction of that woman in Memphis. The problem was, it became too real. When officers came out to her house and they needed to take that formal statement, I already explained to you, she pulled back. She went quiet. She couldn't bring herself to tell them everything. In her mind, she had done what she felt she was supposed to do. She was still his wife. She had made a vow, and part of her felt like she'd already been disloyal by calling in the tip to begin with. She assumed at this point, the cops could take it from there. But that's what's on the surface. There were a lot of reasons that she stayed quiet. And the truth is always going to be more complicated. We know Sharon had been living with Gerald's violence for years. Cooperating fully with the police meant sending the man that she still, in her words, loved to prison for the rest of his life, possibly to death row. And the weight of that was not something that she could bear. And then to her surprise, Gerald comes back about a week later, and he's sitting there writing a note right in front of Sharon. And it said, "I'm leaving because I'm unhappy in our marriage." But she knew that wasn't it. She knew that note was for investigators. A paper trail pointing away from Gerald if they came knocking, which she suspected they would, even without knowing. She called in a tip. Before he walked out the door, he told her the gold rings that he stole were still behind that lounge. They would be worth something if she needed it. And he dug up the money, but she refused to take it. He tried to give it to her, and she said, "Take your blood money with you." He took the cash, and he left in her Beretta. As days passed, the investigation actually took another crucial turn, because out of nowhere, a local bus driver named Alonzo Jeans came forward with a tip, and this caught investigators' attention. He told police he regularly drove down a route past a rural property, the same one that he found out Shannon had been discovered. And over the years, he had never ever seen anyone out there. It was very isolated and quiet. However, he recalled something very unusual on the morning that Shannon disappeared. He'd been driving his regular route along Mississippi State Route 301 around 6:40 a.m. when he saw a burgundy car parked in a driveway of an old rundown house, and there was a man standing near a shed. Then he got in the car and began backing out. And one detail stood out. The man was wearing a distinctive red baseball cap. The driver had never before seen anyone out there, so it made this significant and memorable. Now, this was critical. It was an eyewitness statement, and it rekindled the detective's attention towards the earlier tip that had been dismissed from Sharon. With this new information, her account suddenly takes on this urgent significance. The detectives quickly want to revisit all of the information in that initial call, and they realized their oversight might have cost them precious time. They did a deeper background check into Gerald Powers, and it revealed his terrifying history. And now detectives knew they were dealing with a dangerous repeat offender capable of horrific violence. They were desperate to confront him, so they rushed the Powers household in Clarksville, Mississippi, only to find out he had vanished, along with the maroon Beretta. And immediately, the authorities issued a nationwide alert. But it wasn't until May 22nd, and almost 750 miles away, where Border Patrol agents spotted the maroon Beretta attempting to evade a checkpoint. Now that's a red flag. Border Patrol agent Javier Gonzalez pulled it over, and the driver gets out of the car, and he pulls out a knife. So Gonzalez draws his weapon. He orders the man to the ground, and after a tense standoff, the man complied, and he was taken into custody. When the agents searched him, they found about $1,500 in his pocket, and 14 of them were in $100 bills. The same denomination that Shannon had collected at the blackjack table the night that she was murdered. Authorities quickly confirmed this man's identity, Gerald Lee Powers. And just the day before, on May 21st, he actually approached a U.S. Customs inspection table. At another port, it was the port of entry in Laredo, and an agent stopped him, asked him for his ID, and walked away to run his license, and by the time he came back, Gerald was gone. He got spooked and he ran away. 1 day later, he's in handcuffs, thankfully. He was trying to leave the country. He was trying to go into Mexico. FBI agent Evan Rhea traveled to Laredo to take him into custody and process the arrest. The Beretta was then secured at that checkpoint, and when Sharon, who owned the vehicle, came out to Texas to recover it, she gave the agents permission to search it. And what followed was that kind of painstakingly methodical forensic work, the type that's the backbone of these cases. Investigators went over every surface of that car, lint rollers across the seats, vacuum collection across the floors, tape lifting every surface they could reach, capturing hair and fibers from anywhere a person might have been. Everything that could be lifted was lifted and sent to the FBI laboratory, every single particle. And meanwhile, detectives from Memphis flew to Laredo and questioned Gerald directly. They finally had this man face to face. But he denied everything. He said he didn't know Shannon. He had nothing to do with what happened to her. But he did admit, when pressed, that he had been at Sam's Town Casino that night. When they asked him what he did after he left, he said he went to visit a sick friend in Clarksdale, which was 50 miles from the casino. And when the investigators followed up on that alibi, the friend said he was there visiting. But it didn't account for his full timeline. And it didn't explain the money. It didn't explain why a man on parole pulled a knife on a federal agent at a checkpoint instead of stopping. Gerald was held in Texas awaiting extradition. And in late September of 1996, while he was being transported to the medical ward, he tried to escape. Classic. They always use that as a way out. But this was just one more data point in his pattern. A pattern that had been consistent his entire life. Gerald Powers did not stop. And back in Mississippi, investigators were working on Sharon because they believed correctly that she knew far more than she had told them in that initial conversation. The question was, how are we going to get her to speak? And that is when they brought in Special Agent Jennifer Aiken. She was assigned to the case in June. She went to speak to Sharon and to hopefully build rapport with her. And that first meeting lasted 4 hours. But she didn't go in there with a lot of pressure, ultimatums, and things like that. She just listened calmly. And then she came back and she kept building trust slowly over multiple conversations. She told Sharon, keeping the secret is going to put you in greater danger from Gerald, not less danger. He's not going to hurt you from a jail cell in Texas. And that what she knew mattered more than she could even understand. And eventually, Sharon opened up completely. She told Aiken about the jewelry, the 5 gold and diamond rings that Gerald told her were hidden inside an old couch behind the B&W lounge in Clarksdale, wrapped in pink plastic and foil. This was important because this was a link between Shannon and Gerald, not just words alone. That same afternoon, Agent Aiken, Sharon, and 3 other officers drove to that lounge. And behind the bar, pushed against the wall, was an old abandoned couch. They opened it up, and inside, exactly where Sharon said they would find it, were the rings, bundled in that pink plastic wrap and wrapped in foil. Shannon's sister Jennifer and her husband Robert identified them immediately as belonging to Shannon. Great. They were finally getting somewhere. Investigators had a witness to what Gerald had confessed. They had rings that they recovered exactly in the location he described, but they needed physical evidence from the car to make sure everything could be corroborated independently. And a month later, in July of 1996, the forensic results started coming back from the FBI lab. The first significant result was also the most frustrating. Remember how a pink fake nail had been recovered at the abduction scene on Gerald Street the morning that Shannon was taken? Well, pieces of a fake fingernail with pink polish, similar to that nail that was found on the ground, was found inside the trunk of the Beretta. And investigators believed it had been torn from Shannon's hand during a struggle. But just to confirm, prosecutors had to get a court order to exhume Shannon's body, which is pretty extreme. I actually could not believe it when I heard it, especially after what they found, or I should say, what they didn't find. Her remains were re-examined, and it was confirmed. Shannon had been wearing fake nails that were glued on her fingernails at the time of her death. And one had been collected from that driveway, and it matched her nail. But the nail fragment recovered from the trunk of the Beretta, the shapes didn't match. The colors were not right. It was not Shannon's nail. All of that for nothing. But they kept going because there was something else, something in those lint rolls. One fiber. We're talking about a small, single black wool fiber pulled from the rear of that Beretta. What made it stand out wasn't just the color, it was the dye pattern. The fiber had an uneven, irregular coloring with a distinctive mocha brown tone running through the strands. That kind of detail makes this fiber way more identifiable than a standard sample. It wasn't just black, it was black in a specific traceable way. And FBI trace evidence expert Christopher Hopkins compared that fiber to the clothing that Shannon had been wearing the night she was murdered, specifically her black dress. And under microscopic examination, the fibers were consistent. Using a microspectrophotometer, analysts measured the dye composition and precise details and found no differences between the fiber from the car and the fibers from her dress. The conclusion was clear. Gerald had put her in the trunk, and a fiber from her dress remained there. And then there was the pink plastic wrap that the rings had been bundled inside. When analyzed and compared to a roll of pink plastic wrap that was recovered from inside Gerald's home, they used infrared spectroscopy, which is essentially a way of reading the precise chemicals that something is made from. The composition and the dye in both of the samples were identical. The plastic used to wrap up Shannon's stolen rings had come from Gerald's kitchen. There were no usable fingerprints found on the rings, the plastic, the foil, or even the car, because Gerald had been careful. But careful wasn't the same as invisible. And then there was the casino footage. The detectives went back to Samstown in July of 1996, and they sat down with Tom Scott. He was the director of surveillance. And the agents told him they needed them to look for a specific man. And they gave them the description of what Gerald had been wearing that night. The red baseball cap, the blue jean jacket, dark pants, and white tennis shoes. And this was based on what Sharon, his wife, had told them he was wearing when he left. The agents also gave them a laser copy of Gerald's driver's license photo, and they asked them to go back through all those tapes that I mentioned. They had 512 cameras, and Tom Scott went through between 15 and 20 VHS tapes. Remember, 1996, no digital database. This was just a man sitting in a room watching tape after tape after tape with his own eyes. And what he eventually compiled was a chronological sequence of footage that told the story with such clarity. The reason, though, was totally by chance, which is why sometimes I don't get mad when I'm feeling frustrated about something not going my way. I think maybe there's a reason I'm running late. Maybe there's a reason I dropped something. Maybe there's a reason that one of the cameras in this casino had been left misaligned that evening. Listen to this. I explained to you that casinos care about money, and they care about what's happening to that money. So those cameras are always facing a cashier, a slot machine, a card table, especially when they do what's called a drop, which means when the money gets collected at certain times throughout the day or night, with guards there monitoring. This is when the security team actually moves the cameras to an exact table and records the drop. Well, that early morning at Samstown Casino, one of the cameras was moved to a specific table in front of the second-story balcony around 3 o'clock in the morning, around the same time that Shannon was about to gather her chips and collect her cash and walk from that table to cash out. She was sitting in the downstairs area. Well, that camera upstairs was just a little misaligned upward, just enough to capture the legs of a man standing in front of the balcony, looking right down to the area where Shannon was sitting. He was wearing dark pants and white shoes. Actually, that's all you could see in this video. But now they had a time, they had a location, and they had a person. And they used other cameras to catch his movements. They see him taking the escalator to the first floor and walking right past where Shannon was sitting. When they pause the video, they can make out pants, white shoes, a jacket, and most of all, a baseball cap. The same person was moving through that casino, staying within proximity of Shannon throughout the next few minutes. He passed the exact location she had cashed out. With those cameras getting a clear view of his baseball cap, even though it was in black and white. But there just happened to be one section of cameras that had color footage. And he just happened to walk across that area. And there was no mistaking it. He had on the jean jacket and the red baseball cap. It's Gerald Lee Powers, no doubt about it. Finally. And Sharon was shown a still photograph taken from this footage, and she identified that person as her husband without hesitation. The confession corroborated at every turn by physical evidence that Gerald had no explanation for. So a Shelby County grand jury formally indicted him on charges of first-degree murder and aggravated robbery. But before any of this could go in front of a jury, Gerald had one more move to make. He was going to try to make sure Sharon never got a chance to say anything out loud in a courtroom. 2 words, marital privilege, and I'm sure you've heard it before. It's pretty simple. What you tell your spouse in private stays private. The law has recognized that marriage requires a certain kind of honesty and intimacy, and if you can't say everything to your partner, and you're going to end up having to say it in a courtroom later as evidence, people are going to stop talking to each other. So private conversations between spouses are generally protected. That's the idea anyway. And Gerald's attorneys knew this, and they stood in front of a judge and argued that when Gerald confessed to kidnapping, beating, robbing, and murdering Shannon, that was in private. It was a marital conversation, confidential and protected, and therefore Sharon shouldn't be allowed to share a word of it in front of a jury. The defense even showed a letter to the judge that Sharon had written to Gerald after he was arrested and in jail, where she called him baby, and she signed it with sealed with a kiss. They used it as evidence that they were still in a loving marriage. It was worth protecting. What they didn't tell the judge was that Sharon wrote that letter because she was terrified of Gerald and was trying to hide the fact she had gone to police. It wasn't love. It was survival. She was waking up now that she was free from him. The prosecution, though, introduced one of their letters, a letter that Gerald had written himself saying that both of them were better off apart. Gerald also admitted he had been violent with Sharon and with her children. Judge Joseph Daly heard all of it, and he ruled that the marriage did not meet the standard required for privilege to apply. Sharon was going to testify. That fiber was going in front of the jury. The casino footage going in front of the jury. The rings, the plastic wrap, the confession, all of it. A jury of 12 people was about to hear every single detail of what Gerald Lee Powers did to Shannon on that street that shared his same name. December 1998, 2.5 years after Shannon was taken from that driveway, the trial began. Now, this is not a deep dive. I'm not going to go into every detail of this trial, but I'm going to have to give you the highlights because they're so important. On the first day of trial, Shannon's 3 children were in that courtroom. It wasn't for a dramatic moment or manipulation. It was because those 3 kids were the truth of what had been taken. The jury needed to see them before they heard a single word of testimony. The assistant district attorney, Amy Wyrich, opened for the state, and she was precise. She laid out the timeline without drama because she didn't need to add any drama. The facts were dramatic enough on their own, and the jury heard every detail I told you about, and they listened to every witness. And then Sharon took the stand. She told the jury about the morning Gerald came home, and everything the man she thought she loved confessed to her. On cross-examination, though, the defense did what they could do. They pointed out Sharon's initial statements to police had been incomplete, that she had written Gerald a love letter after the arrest, that the FBI had paid her $4,000, well, it was technically for damages to her car and relocation expenses, but the implication was clear. They were suggesting that Sharon had a reason to say what she said, and it had nothing to do with the truth. But Sharon held strong. The defense also tried to introduce evidence that the other men who were actually in Shannon's life and had been investigated, Robert, Michael, and Brett, each had a motive to kill her. But the judge actually ruled all of that inadmissible. None of it directly connected to anything in this crime. Motive alone is not evidence. The jury deliberated for just over 1 hour. Guilty. First-degree murder. Guilty. Aggravated robbery. And as the verdict was being read, Gerald showed nothing. No reaction. No response. Just a man sitting in a chair while the weight of what he had done was finally spoken out loud in a room that he's not going to just get up and walk away from this time. Now, the sentencing phase took a little longer because now the jury had to decide not just that Gerald Lee Powers was guilty, they knew that now, but what the rest of his life was going to look like. Life or death. And for that, they were going to need a full picture. Emily Dodson bravely took the stand. the 17-year-old who had been followed home one night after graduating high school, who had fought Gerald off with his own wrench and ran for her front door. She was a grown woman now, sitting in a courtroom describing that night that he held a knife to her throat and told her to drive. Karen Cannon had the courage to come forward as well and testify. The 18-year-old who had given a stranger a ride from a restaurant had her nose broken with the handle of a knife before she drove herself to a county jail with him in the car and leaned on the horn until someone came out. And the jury also heard about Clio Griffin, 74 years old, beaten in her own home with a skillet, her jewelry, her gun stolen. They heard about the escape attempt in Texas. Gerald Lee Powers never stopped. He never would. And then Carolyn Holland took the stand, Shannon's former mother-in-law, the woman who watched Shannon drop off her 3 grandchildren that April evening, and had spent years since then helping raise those same 3 children who didn't understand why their mom never came home. She told the jury that Michael Jr., Amber, and Chance, who were now 10, 8, and 6 years old, had never stopped missing their mother. That Shannon's disappearance had been traumatic in ways that showed up in every single thing they did every single day. That the children had developed a devastating fear of people getting lost. That they had trouble sleeping alone. That they still cried for their mother. That the bond between Shannon and those 3 kids had been one of the strongest things Caroline had ever witnessed, and that losing it had reshaped all of them in ways that were still unfolding. All of that was very emotionally compelling. But then it was the defense's turn to present any mitigating testimony, and this was indeed a shocking moment, because Gerald's first wife, Pamela, walked through the courtroom doors. The first woman who truly ever loved him, the mother of his only children, the girl that he had started dating in high school. She was there for him. Pamela stood before the jury, and through tears, she asked them to spare his life. She told them she remembered a different version of Gerald, shy, quiet, a good father to their children, a man who had respected her mother. She said she still saw something in him that was worth preserving, and she begged the jury not to take that from his children or his grandchildren. It was a very difficult moment to sit through, because Pamela wasn't lying. She was remembering something that was real to her. The boy she fell in love with, he had existed. But whatever happened to him between then and the night he followed Shannon out of that casino and drove her to that shed in Mississippi, Pamela hadn't been there for that. She was mourning a version of Gerald that the rest of this evidence suggested had been gone for a very long time. The jury deliberated for 40 minutes. Death. They chose death. They found 3 aggravating circumstances: that Gerald had prior convictions for violent felonies, that he had committed the murder to avoid arrest and prosecution because every woman that survived had identified him, and that he committed the murder while in an act of kidnapping Shannon. The judge sentenced Gerald to death and then sentenced him to an additional 20 years for robbery to be served consecutively. Gerald Lee Powers was sent to death row. And in 2003, the Tennessee Supreme Court reviewed his entire case on an appeal, and they upheld everything. The conviction, the sentence, all of it was affirmed. And Gerald sat on death row for years, for decades, filing appeal after appeal, exhausting every legal process, existing in a system that had said clearly what it believed his life was worth and kept him alive anyway. Shannon's children grew up, they graduated, they built lives, they became adults, and then parents themselves. And Gerald was still there, still on death row, still breathing. And here's why I even found this case to begin with. Because just last year, around the same time, April 25th of 2025, nearly 29 years after he followed Shannon out of that casino and changed lives forever, Gerald Lee Powers died on death row at the age of 70. Not by execution, just by time. His body gave out before the state ever got around to ending things officially. He never confessed. He never even expressed any remorse. He never gave Shannon's family the one thing that would have cost him nothing, an acknowledgement of what he had done. The only person he ever told was the woman sleeping in his bed. But I want to come back to Shannon, because we've spent a lot of time in the story inside Gerald's violence, Sharon's fears, the mechanics of the entire investigation and the trial, and all that needed to be said, because it does matter. But I don't want the last image in your mind to be Gerald Powers and him dying in prison. I don't want the story to end with him, because the story has been about Shannon. She was only 25 years old when she was taken from that driveway. She had 3 children who needed her, adored her. She was a daughter, a sister, a mother, a friend. She was so many things to so many people, and a monster reduced her to a target in less than an hour. Her children lost so much. Shannon wasn't there for the first day of school anymore. She wasn't there for graduations. She wasn't there for the moments that were small enough you don't even think about them until they're gone. The ordinary Tuesday afternoons, the phone calls, the dinners. She wasn't there when her children needed their mom. Shannon never got a chance to become a grandmother, but Shannon's grandchildren know who she is. They ask about her. They know about her through stories and through the love that her family still feels for her. And I think about that a lot. And I just want to say to Shannon's family and loved ones, I am so sorry that she was taken from you. I'm so sorry that monsters with evil minds exist among us. In Shannon's family, they did feel a deep and lasting gratitude towards Sharon, the one who called in the tip. She did the right thing. She later said that if she couldn't say anything else good about her life, she knew she had done one thing that mattered. She made that call. She told the truth. And she helped make sure the monster was caught. Shannon deserved so much more. So the least we can do is remember her. And I want to thank you all for being here for her story. I will see you in my next video. Bye.